Okie dokie. So this is probably going to be a little bit of a long video because I didn't prepare very well, and I just finished working on. I didn't prepare to make a video, but I just finished working on my game here, and I'm trying to post it right now. And chances are I'm going to have to quit making the video anyways because I'm probably going to discover that there's something I needed to do. So first I'm going to switch over to the display capture, and here my computer's still reloading the domain. Okay, so I just finished building the thing, and what I'm going to try to show is here's how I'm going to go about trying to overcome the difficulties of accounting for extremely high speed and low speed at the same time. So here's my test object, here's a capsule, and if I edit the collider, you can see here's this collider diagram, and then you can also see that, so I have 4 of them and they're different sizes. And what happens is this object right here ties to the velocity of the vehicle, so it doesn't point in the direction the vehicle's pointing, it always points in the direction the vehicle is traveling. And then the faster the vehicle goes, it moves up from the first capsule to the second capsule to the third capsule, and when it's really booking, now there's the 4th capsule, and you can see how long that collider is. And the reason that collider is so long is because it's really important that even if the ship only appears here and then it's a frame, it's going so fast it calculates to be way up here, if the hoop is anywhere in that space, then it won't know that the ship hit it. Now you're supposed to come in here to your rigid body in Unity, and you have your collision detection, and you switch it to continuous speculative or continuous dynamic. And then what they do is it casts a line out in front of it, and it estimates where you're going to be in the next frame, and then it tries to calculate that anywhere between those 2 frames it'll say that you hit it. And so it might be working or it might not, I have no idea. In my testing, I found that I needed to have a very long collider when I was going very fast, and that way, even though my ship skips way ahead in a frame, this vehicle is so long that it's still in the hoop. So the problem with a really long collider is then it's taking up so much space it can cause some problems. So one problem is that when you're building the course, and if you want to turn around and go backwards or something through the hoop, then your long collider gets in the way. But also having a long collider, now it's way out there, and it's gonna trigger the hoops erroneously. If you go flying past it, it might trigger the hoop. So when you're going more slow, which is, if you're going very fast, you're probably just going in a straight line. It's hard to slow down and turn very quickly, so you're probably not going to erroneously trigger with a long collider when you're going very fast, but when you're going very slow, then you might. So when you're going very slow, you get the short one, and then again, it's aiming only in the direction you're traveling, not in the direction that you're pointing. And then that also should help when you're building the course, to when you're going through and you're ordering your hoops, it will trigger each hoop in the correct direction, right? So actually the direction is something different. It will trigger the hoop, but it needs to now trigger the hoop in the correct direction. So here's my hoop, and here's all my direction check meshes. So as you can see, this is actually quite a big hoop. The ship is very small in there, so jumping from here to here, that might happen, and I can add more direction check meshes or spread them out. It's just a tuning thing. I can tune that at a later time when I start having some feedback about either myself playing it or someone else is playing it. If they're erroneously triggering the wrong direction, I don't know that there's a problem, but I tested this pretty fast and it's working pretty well. between the two fixes, but with a very long collider shooting all the way through, it might trigger the wrong direction. So here again, it's going to try to detect the ship way out. And the reason why you need so many meshes is because it only detects at the skin of the mesh. So if the object moves all the way into the middle of the mesh, or if it moves all the way through the mesh and into this one over here, it either won't trigger or it'll trigger the wrong direction. So I had a lot of problems with that. And these also turn on sequentially. Here's my script right here. So when the ship is only going slow, the one that's only right in there is the only one that's on. But as the ship speeds up, each of these turn on so that when you're going really fast, you can trigger the direction from way out here. And again, I just am concerned that there will be erroneous direction check triggers. And then because of the way the trigger works, if you're on one side and if you're over here and then you fly around over here too quickly, because your settings are going pretty fast, and you can accidentally trigger these over here and then come over here, it'll still think you're over here because it doesn't turn these off until either a little duration has passed, or if you go all the way through the middle, then it'll turn these off over here. So when you come passing through, it'll be on, and then when you leave the middle, that way if you wanted your course that you got to go all the way through and then turn right back around and come back through, as soon as you leave the middle, there's a mesh in there that I can also show. It's kind of red. As soon as you pass all the way through and leave this one, these direction check meshes will unregister you there so that you can just kind of bounce through and then go back the other way if that's what you wanted to do. But if you went into these, because there's some space between them and because the way that I'm concerned that the player might erroneously or not trigger, so there's an amount of time that these stay on even if it doesn't detect you, and then if you did manage to fly around, it would trigger these. So when you're going slow, these aren't on, and you have to be much closer to the mesh to actually trigger them. So the way that it basically works is as you accelerate, both the ship gets artificially longer and the race meshes get artificially bigger, so that it's more likely that even though you're skipping so many frames, you're skipping so much distance from frame to frame and the physics engine can't keep up, you're more likely to successfully trigger the hoop in the correct direction, whether you're building the course or flying the course. So hopefully the whole thing will go smoothly for you if you try to build a course and then go flying around it really fast. So that's one part of the update that I'm trying to post right now. So hopefully everything goes smoothly. I'll show in the second. I also added a bunch of space stations to the forward-only vehicle and the drone and the loader. So I'm going to pop over to the game. Here my game is running. Sounds nice. Okay, so I'm gonna go. I didn't play around in the drone menu yet. I'll use this ISS exterior as like a size comparison. So the ISS exterior level is pretty fun because here I've got this International Space Station, which is a model somebody made of the International Space Station in roughly its present form. I threw that space shuttle on there. It's also part of its pack. Obviously that's not there anymore. But a lot of the modules here are current from within about the last 10 years. You would expect to see in about last 5 years, maybe you would expect to see about like that. Okay, so here my drone. Here's an astronaut who's probably not the right size. It's probably a little too big. This astronaut might be a little too big. They actually might even be a little bit too small. So I'm trying to think. I just saw these Russian cosmonauts out on the space station outside of it. And this astronaut might be even too small. So it's not terrible. It's not a terrible size comparison. I think it's just a little too small because the suit is so big. And then if you want to see what the drone is sized about, so, oops. So there you can see it's about the size of a regular drone. Okay. So I'll come flying out here, and now I'm just going to try to get around quickly, since I'm going to be placing some objects. So let me get some distance here, come out, so you can see in placer mode. So here's the space station, International Space Station. And here is some examples of some of the space stations that I've included as placeable objects. Oops, I bounced against it. So here's one, and this isn't one of the bigger ones. But so you can see that they're roughly a similar size. I mean, some of these are a little bigger. And so there's 20 of these placeable space stations. So let me try to get a little bit closer over here. So actually I think the ISS is still a little bit bigger. But overall, the size of them makes for a playable racing object where you can put it there and then you can put hoops around it. And again, there's 20 of them. Now these work like regular placeable objects where you can connect to them and then you can tow them around, but you can't rotate very well. I don't know what it is, but you just, no matter what I do, I just can't spin very well. So with these, you pretty much have to delete them and place them again. I mean, there's just not much that I can figure how to get around that. And if you want to move it, and the other thing too is there's so many colliders in here. Normally my hoop mesh colliders, what you do when you connect is the collider turns off. Let me see if I can find another example of that. Well, any hoop will actually do it. So the collider turns off so that if I come flying in here, and you can see that I can fly right through that thing. The hoop won't hit it. And that way if I want to place hoops halfway into stuff, and then when I disconnect, the collider turns back on, and then I bounce into it. Well, these space stations have a lot of colliders, and rather than trying to turn every single one of them off, making these huge scripts for 100 colliders or whatever, and then clicking and dragging 100 times for each space station, they don't move around anyways, they don't turn off. So the best practice for the most part in placing a space station, if you want to move it, you just have to delete it and then place it again. Unfortunately, I don't have a better way to go about it right now. There's probably a way if I turned off all the colliders to make the physics engine ignore it. Maybe I can deactivate something, but they're huge, and really you should be setting up your objects to be around the space stations, and your space stations should mostly end up kind of far off by themselves in the distance, and then you would fly really far from one station to another. And so I think it's okay that if you just delete it and place it again. And as usual, the way to do that is that you have to fly up in here. You gotta find the little cube, and this is the connector, and it's pretty common from all the objects, and you get within the cube field, and then you can delete it or connect to it once you get that green glow. It's a little easier with the rings. Let's see if I can come across that ring here, and then you just go into the ring and you get that same glow. But obviously with the space station, it could be anywhere. You got to make sure and find it. But you shouldn't be placing too terribly many of these in a given level for the most part. I mean, it can be fun. My button doesn't work to go backwards very well. I'm trying to go backwards. So if I just go placing a whole bunch of objects, it's actually quite fun. And then now from here, I can come flying around this object-dense place. So there's a fair chance that you'll want to place a number of space stations all together, and then even flying in space mode, it can be quite fun. And then you know, some people, they don't even want to play the drone mode, but racing only works in the drone mode, so. And then the cameras only really work in the drone mode also. Space mode, you only really get that one external camera. But that's more suitable for chasing objects. And that's kind of the objective of it. But it still ends up being pretty fun to cruise around your stuff. But I don't have any plans to make it so that you can race like that. Play this kind of the game in that kind of way. And then I guess, I mean, this isn't particularly terribly new news or anything like that, but there's still only these two basic, but in the forward-only vehicle, so switching to space mode here. I added all 20 space stations, but I also added these rocks. And these rocks are in some of the other vehicles as well, or pretty much all of them. So there isn't so many objects that you can place with the forward-only vehicle. There's about 10 hoops. They're all quite big. There's 20 space stations. And a reset location. So the hoops are about like that. So if I switch back, and then I go to these third-person cameras and kind of zoom out. Oops, wrong button. I switched where my camera controls were because I was trying to, so you can see about how big that hoop is. And so my logic was having only some few bigger hoops with the forward-only vehicle and having most of these space stations. That, I mean, obviously I can do more work with the forward-only vehicle, but turn on rotation and stabilization. Is that the vehicle is quite a bit more difficult to fly forward-only. So being forward-only, you end up, it's not so much of the same as the drone, where the drone is really suited to being really close to a jumble of stuff, and then you fly around like right in that little tiny local area of the International Space Station. Forward-only vehicle tends to be kind of a lot more difficult to have a lot of control in a close quarters because you can only go forward. So in order to change, then you kind of got to turn all the way to one side, and then you can kind of change your direction. So I've found that the forward-only vehicle, I mean, you can look around with your cameras and all this kind of stuff. It's kind of more like you want more space, you want more time between each maneuver, and it just works out that I feel the more conceptually sound approach to forward-only vehicle gaming is that you would put some space stations and some rocks and have quite a bit of distance between them all, and then when you're gonna fly around, you might put, you know, one of these really big hoops, you know, over here at this space station, and maybe you're gonna fly around it, so you put another one over here, and then you want another hoop like way over here at this other space station, and you want to get flying through it, and then you got to use your camera to look around, you know, and then you kind of got to aim. So if I'm going to try to get moving over here, so I got it on high settings here, so I'm moving pretty fast. You can see that in this vehicle it takes quite a bit more time. So let's say I want to aim for this hoop down here. So I need to kind of aim over here, and need to kind of control my, well, I do have rotation stabilization, let me turn that off. And then I want to look at my camera, and then I want to throttle forward and try to aim like that. So I just kind of aim it up. And now I'm moving into that hoop over there. Then I can turn more forward, and if I'm going to go far, then I can accelerate a little bit more. Or I can get turned around because I need to hit the brake. And then I can look through my rear-facing camera, and I can start hitting the brake. I got to aim. And so now I made it. I didn't hit into it, you know. My roll is kind of reversed here when I got that, and I'm still not quite used to that. And I didn't warm up right now, so I'm flying all over the place, but so you can kind of see that the forward-only vehicle, ultimately I'm sure that there will be a good reason to put in smaller hoops and fly around closer spaces, but for me right now, and I kind of feel like other people might have similar challenges, I just find that it's more suited to large open space, and more distance between the hoops. So the only objects that are really placeable for the forward-only vehicle right now are the space station and some rocks and about 10 hoops. I may put even some bigger hoops in there, but at the time I originally made these hoops, they were enormous. So I'll play around with some more hoops and stuff like that. But the one I'm posting right now only has hoops that size. And there's other things that I'm trying to worry about. So I could just throw some hoops in there, but I kind of want to pick some nice ones that are maybe looks more like the other ones, but maybe quite a bit bigger. And we'll just see what happens. So that's my update, I think, for right now. Just a recap of some of the other things that I put in there not too distant ago. So you have joystick input curves, and one example of where you might use a joystick input curve is that the roll is so much more sensitive on the forward-only vehicle because it's very long, it's not very wide, so it rolls really easily. You might add some expo to your roll curve, and then that will help you stay in control of your roll. Or if you're docking to a space station with one of the other vehicles, you may not want to constantly switch your power level, so you may want to turn your horizontal and vertical thrust into a nice curve so that you can get squared up and lined up just right if you're using rotation stabilization. Or you can go ahead and put some curves on all your rotation controls and turn rotation stabilization off, is what I recommend. And then just, this makes it a lot easier to be careful. I did recently put in rotation stabilization. As you may have remember from earlier in the video, rotation stabilization did use the thrust. It doesn't use friction like the Unity common thing to do. But what that means is that, technically speaking, I have quite some work to do because I need to tune rotation stabilization. And I kind of need to use a lot of the same kind of theory as kind of regular stabilization in robotics or PID controllers and stuff, and actually I just really need a D and a PD, or I don't really need a PID controller but for rotation stabilization, but there is kind of some reasons why I want a PID controller for some other stuff. For example, with the loader, when it's driving a big weight out the front, it'd be kind of nice to be able to drive by using the camera. If you point the camera, then you want your vehicle to automatically try to line up with your camera, and then you'd want to have a set point as your camera, and then you'd use PID controller to automatically just fly the ship to line up with your camera. Or I don't know, maybe if there was going to be auto docking at some point, that would be quite a bit of work to program it. But if I programmed in an auto dock, then it would be the same thing, and we need to know where it's going to try to dock to, and then that would be the set point, and then it would need a PID controller to basically line it up with all the set points in sequential order. The input curves are really basic right now, and what I'd really prefer is like a drone. When you set up a drone controller, they have more of a, you can come up a little bit right away. This is what I want to be able to come up a little bit right away in a linear until you get to a minimum point so that you have a nice slow rotation. Then I want basically an expo curve from there for a little while so that you can get to that reason. You don't have to go too far to get useful input, but you have a lot of control once you start getting useful input, and that would be a setting that the player can tune. They could turn up where this curve starts, and it would be linear until the curve starts. Then it would be kind of flat for however they decide, and then it would come up more steeply so that they don't have to go quite so far to get into the more rapid acceleration. And then that would all be a tunable expo thing, and then you would level off again up at the top, because right at the very top you don't need that as much, and then you have that little bit of throw to get to the very top, but the mid-range gets a lot more capable. And then your top end, it's not that, there's a little bit of throw at the end that it's a little bit wasted because you could probably go up a little faster at the end, but you can tune it just right, and then most of the time if you're kind of in the mid-range, then you're good enough. And then if you're going to peg it, you're going to push the stick so hard anyways, then that extra travel doesn't really cost you anything because you're just pegging it back and forth. But for fine, precise maneuvering, you want to be able to get to where the thrust is on at a minimum useful level, and then you want to have kind of a lot of throw where it doesn't increase that quickly, and then you want it to turn up to get into the higher end of the thrust, and then you kind of want some control in that higher end so that you have some distance between max and about 3/4 or so, and then you want to be able to get up to that 1/2 or 3/4 pretty quickly from the low end. In that mid-range, there is kind of this area where you do lose a little bit of resolution in order to gain that resolution out there, but you kind of end up where you want some resolution, a lot of resolution at the beginning, and then kind of upper mid-range, you tend to want a little bit of resolution. And then there's the space between there is not quite so important, and then the very high end is not quite so important. Okay, so then of course I added the import levels pack, and then from each vehicle you can import and export directly to packs. And if you export to pack, then you can generate a pack if it's not in there already. So if you type a name here and there's not one there, then export your course to it. It'll create a pack for you. And well, it's getting to be kind of a long video, but that should basically summarize. You can turn the input curves on and off with a toggle, and I forget what button I have assigned to that. Okay, so ship controls. Is that a ship control? Yeah, input curves enable, so on my keypad 0. So if you want input curves some of the time, and then if you want linear some of the time, you can toggle the input curves on and off. And then every single ship has its own input curves. So if you set your input curves over here on the drone, that only applies to space drone levels. It applies to every space drone levels, but for this interior vehicle, it's actually a different vehicle. It's space drone small. So you can have a separate set of input curves for this interior vehicle and the exterior vehicle. Oh, I found a mistake. I gotta turn that collider mesh off. Alright, I knew that was gonna happen. Success. I figured out something I needed to fix. Thank you very much.